Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Hopefully, by now, you know we're well into our year-end awards season. We began last Monday, actually, and this is now the fifth installment. Last week, we had 4 different specials, plus our Christmas special involving Robert Davi. Tons of different awards, and if you haven't listened to those, they're a lot of fun, not only to look back, but we had a lot of fun talking about them as well. So make sure you go back and listen to those. Today, we're going to take aim at the media with the most overreported and underreported stories of the year, as well as what we see as the best overall stories of the year. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at our person of the year and our turncoat of the year. And then on New Year's Day, we're going to have our fearless predictions for 2025. So you don't want to miss any of that. We'll be back to our usual fare on January 2nd. And so, Jim, let's start with the most overreported story for 2024. I had a lot more nominees for underreported than overreported, so I'm curious to see what you pick here.
Yeah, and actually, this is one of those rare days where I don't have runner-ups or honorable mentions. I came up with 3 clear ones, and hopefully we don't overlap. The most overreported story of 2024 was joy. And by that, I mean, for about 6 weeks after Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee, the American media and the daily news cycle was sort of in a holding pattern. Right? Republican political strategists will tell you, if you don't feed the beast will eat you. And by that, they mean if you don't have some news item for almost at least every weekday, if not every day, if you're not unveiling a new proposal, making some new statement, if you doing some event, if you're not doing things for the press to write about, they will find something to write about you, and it's probably not going to be good, particularly if you're a Republican. So you need to be go out and doing these things. And in a very strange way, Trump is actually a master of this. If with all, you go out and you say, we're going to buy Greenland today, and all of a sudden, like, whoa, okay, now that's the thing you're going to talk about. That's going to dominate the news cycle for the next 24 hours. Kamala Harris, as we listeners likely remember, didn't do an interview for nearly 2 months after becoming the nominee. So the only way you could hear her that she was saying things was going around the country and giving her stump speech. And it was pretty much the same speech, but sometimes hello Cleveland and then sometimes hello Phoenix, but like they're very minimal changes. I went and I checked. She did not mention like Russia and Ukraine at all in her first 11 speeches. You'd get 1 or 2 speeches, 1 or 2 references to China fleetingly. Like it was the same old stuff. It was the stump speech we'd see, and not too different from the speeches she had been giving as vice president, as the running mate to Joe Biden for much of the previous year. So there just wasn't anything to say. There wasn't anything new to dissect, to argue about, to analyze. It was like it was a good stretch until she came up with her first actual policy proposal, which was this new commission or this new effort to crack down on price controls. There was basically we're going to grocery stores and all that stuff. And as my Washington Post colleague, Catherine Rampel, wrote, who's not a right-wing ideologue by any stretch of the imagination, the headline was, if you're going to be accused of socialism, maybe don't lead with price controls. And, like, a very fair point. And it was just kind of this entire, like, there was just, that's why you saw so much talk about coconut trees and memes and joy and all that. You go back and you look, there were a ton of columns that were written about this, and there was a lot of quotes of how Democrats felt about Harris being the nominee. There was very few quotes from Harris herself because she wasn't saying anything. So this kind of artificial enthusiasm, this like forced sense of, isn't this great? I can't, was probably like the worst. And like for 6 weeks, it was one story of, wow, Democrats are really enthusiastic about Harris being the nominee because they didn't want to write about Biden. It was really embarrassing that after insisting he was fine, that it turned out to not be the case. Kamala Harris did something you're really not supposed to, you shouldn't be able to do, which is not do interviews and not say anything new or different for a 6-week stretch. And somehow she emerged with really very minimal criticism outside of the right of center press.
No, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, she tried to run out the clock because she got endorsed by Biden, which threw the Democrats off. And then she really got rid of about a month and a half of it by not talking to the press at all. But the press just, as soon as they got rid of Biden, they were just relieved to get rid of Biden because he was losing. It had the horrible debate. So we're just going to come up with this narrative that Kamala's awesome and everyone is so excited about her. Where if you go back, I think it was in March, Kathleen Parker was writing a column of Biden should dump Harris. She's a drag on the ticket. And if he picks someone that people like better, they'd feel better about voting for him because if he keels over, then at least they've got somebody they think can make a qualified president. Because remember, Biden was supposed to serve 4 years. By then, Harris was supposed to be ready to go. She clearly wasn't. And I guess because she giggles a lot in public, they said, oh, well, that's not incompetence and cluelessness. That's joy. We're just going to run with that and say that she's just, shiny, happy people and everybody loves it. And so then we got these rallies in different places once she's already, the candidate. And then we're on to picking a vice presidential running mate and so forth. And so this was a completely fake narrative. And remember why she struggled so much. Her staff was constantly in turmoil because they hated working for her. She was a terrible boss. She was unprepared, meaning she was potentially lazy. And then when things didn't go well in public, she would blame them. And so that doesn't strike me as joyful, Jim. I don't see that as a joyful atmosphere in the office. So I go on and on basically to say I agree with you that is the biggest story that's overreported this year. I will say as a backup, I think the cheerleading for the Senate immigration bill, just because Biden was hurting so much on immigration, they had to try and pivot the narrative. That's why the Democrats, agreed to this negotiation with James Lankford and so forth. And so we have this entire bill that they say, oh, well, if we just did this, then everything would be fine. Meanwhile, the bill codified catch and release, let in nearly 2 million illegals a year under the law that they were proposing, funded sanctuary cities, funded NGOs shadily moving illegals around. They provided lawyers at our taxpayer expense to illegals, work permits to illegals, nothing for deportation, mind you, nothing to build the wall. There were some important provisions in there that would have sped up the evaluation of asylum claims potentially, and just on and on it goes. They decided this was the toughest bipartisan border bill in generations, and in the end, it would not have done a tremendous amount. And so that's my backup. One more that we were probably guilty of just because it wasn't that big of a deal, although it may have derailed her chances to be vice president. The weeks and weeks of coverage of Kristi Noem killing her dog, which a good friend of mine pointed out that actually in a farm situation, she did the right thing. So I don't know. I'm not a dog person, but it may have been overkill there. But in the end, I don't know if it cost her the nomination or not, but that was definitely one that lingered there for a while.
You know, when God closes a door, he opens a window. And we'll get to see that kind of diehard willingness to do what needs to be done at the Department of Homeland Security, assuming the confirmation hearings go well. So they say to know him is to love him. And I don't know if that applies to dogs. But,
well, it might apply to coyotes, as you joked earlier.
You're going to get dog jokes for sorry, Kristi Noem. That's baked in the cake, till the last dog dies, which might be a little faster with her in charge of DHS.
All right, Jim. Most underreported story of 2024.
All right. Before we begin, Greg, we should make kind of this announcement. This is officially going to be this category will be the Wuhan Institute of Virology Lab Leak honorary underreported story. We're giving it kind of the Lifetime Achievement Award because it was underreported in 2020 and really could have been the winner for 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. But that is not my nominee in this category. It is about something that is almost as deadly and really as dangerous to all kinds of people. And by that, I mean Doug Emhoff. Look, Doug Emhoff, according to some reporting out there, that the mainstream media didn't want to touch. There were two stories about that were, one is banging the nanny, getting her pregnant. We don't know what happened to the child. It was abortion or miscarriage or whether there's some little Dougie out there that we just don't know about. There was that issue which broke up his first marriage. And then the second one was an ex-girlfriend who allegedly he smacked around for flirting with some other man. Both of those are bad. If Doug Emhoff had been the husband of the Republican presidential nominee, we would have heard a great deal more about it. It would have been maybe bigger than Brett Kavanaugh.
Wall to wall. Absolutely.
Yeah, there was very minimal coverage of this. And there were other people who really insisted that Doug Emhoff, look, I'm a wife guy, you're a wife guy. Our wives are awesome. There's nothing wrong with a husband saying, I'm proud of my wife's achievements. She's, every time she succeeds, I'm proud of her. That's all fine. But there were a lot of people who really wanted to talk about Doug Emhoff being some sort of amazing new role model of masculinity for being a supportive husband. And I think every supportive husband in the country was horse pucky. And I wanted to say other words than that. Because, a whole bunch of actual supportive husbands didn't knock up the nanny. I suppose these are stories that could have been made up. We'll never know because nobody really decided to look at them too hard. Are there flaws in the, all I know is they give everything short of a proctological exam to Kavanaugh, but these two stories come out about Emhoff and nobody wants to hear a darn thing about them. And it's just a demonstration. As with the lab leak, you come across a story and the consequences are so horrible that a lot of people in the mainstream media just can't deal with it. So they avert their eyes. They just, deny it. And look, if the day we find smoking gun evidence of the lab leak, the Chinese government will be responsible for the deaths of, at minimum millions, more likely when you add in all the consequential deaths, tens of millions. Like people don't know how to get their heads around that. If the guy who came very close, the second husband, and the person who came close to being the first husband had been a, guy who beat up his girlfriend, and results of his first marriage are all kind of verified. Knowing that about him is too horrible for most Democrats and most people in the media to contemplate. So they just kind of go into a denial stage about it. And I think as a result, I think we're very poorly served by that, particularly if your job as a journalist is to say, this is how the world is. Sometimes it sucks. And I think on this podcast, you're going to do a pretty good job of saying, hey, there's a reason there's a bad martini. Not every day is going to be sunshines and rainbows and jelly beans for conservatives. And I kind of feel like if you're a mainstream media, you got to tell people what's going on, whether it's good for your side or not. And once again, in 2024, we saw some egregious failures in this duty.
And they shouldn't have a side, for starters, but they could at least report it out. And if I recall correctly, Jim, both of those Emhoff stories, at least one of them for sure, was broken by foreign press. I believe it was the Daily Mail. Yeah. And so, the U.S. mainstream media just didn't want to touch it all. And the only time it ever came up in an interview was with Emhoff and Joe Scarborough, and Emhoff's like, oh, it's just too bad we have all these distractions. No follow-up from Scarborough whatsoever on any of it. Okay, it's been addressed. It's like giving Biden that one question about Tara Reid a bunch of years ago, and then the story just goes away where it wouldn't happen with a Republican. Another one from the mainstream media in the election context that I thought about, because Emhoff was on my list as well. The media's complete lack of any interest in why Tim Walz was in China dozens and dozens of times. Didn't care even that he lied about Tiananmen Square. They did ask it in the debate, which definitely didn't go well for him. I would say the second assassination attempt on Trump, since there was never a shot fired, went away within a day or two. But the one I'm going to use here, I'm going to go back all the way to January. And even before this, Iranian-backed proxies had been firing at U.S. military positions in Iraq, possibly Syria. People were getting wounded, and the media's, what are you going to do? Then late January, 3 Americans were killed at a facility in Jordan. And after that, there was a little bit of coverage there for a couple of days, and then Biden ordered a round of basically meaningless airstrikes against weapons depots, probably cleared out for the most part in a number of places around the Middle East. And once, there had been a response, we're done. Very little concern whatsoever about our forces in the region, even after they had been killed. They did their perfunctory, here's who died, here's where they're from. But basically, it's kind of like when they had the wildfires in Hawaii. Once Biden went there, story's over. Same thing here. We fire a few missiles that probably don't change the equation much at all in the Middle East. Story's over. We're done. Moving on. Ridiculous.
That is an excellent selection there, Greg. And as you're describing, I'm reminded. So every once in a while, you'll find somebody in the mainstream media who has a beat and they cover it well. And it just doesn't blow up the way it should, but it's well covered. I believe it was Associated Press, and they were embedded with one of the ships that was in the Red Sea and in that area. And the description, I believe, was like, this is the most intense, sustained combat for the U.S. Navy since World War II. World War II, involving the Houthis in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden and that whole area around Yemen. And it's like, how is that not a bigger deal? Like every once in a while, I will marvel that, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the largest land war in Europe since World War II. That seems like the sort of thing would be a big deal, but I can't say that the, Russian invasion of Ukraine is so just vastly undercovered compared to what's going on with the Houthis and the U.S. Like they're shooting drones, they're shooting rockets, they're shooting stuff almost on a daily basis. And it's barely ever news. And thankfully, it's because our guys are very good at shooting them down before there are any casualties. But just another demonstration of, look, a lot of stories, if it makes Biden look bad, it just doesn't reach this threshold of interest that it takes to go from being anything beyond what I would characterize as check-the-box journalism.
All right, Jim, a lot of frustration with the media this year, but now we get to just decide for ourselves. What was the best story of 2024?
Okay. So the obvious pick is, the 2024 election results. A whole bunch of, I'm sure our listeners are probably high-fiving on election night, Trump's victory. Because that's almost too obvious, I want to go with probably a less recognized, but maybe even more far-reaching consequence. And it's all of these second-order effects of Trump's win. I'll pick 4, but you can kind of find them all over. You find them in the business pages. You find them in international news. There are things that clearly are happening because of Trump's victory that almost certainly would not have happened if Kamala Harris had won the election, that are good for U.S. interests, that are good for the world, but are not necessarily it's not the American people who voted for this. One early example, Taiwan greeting Trump's victory with talk of a spending spree on U.S. defense systems. They want the advanced Hawkeye radar systems, Patriot missiles, F-35 jets, Aegis-equipped destroyers, and the retired Ticonderoga-class cruisers. I'm practice pronouncing that. Perry-class frigates. We've got ones that are outdated, but they can go in, put new electronics, and add that to their coastal defenses. Almost immediately after the election, shoe retailer Steve Madden. Usually when you say Madden to me, it's a sportscaster. You say it to my kids, it's a video game. But Steve Madden, almost immediately after the election, said they plan to rapidly pull back China-based production by up to 45%. They're looking to focus more of their operations in Brazil, Mexico, Vietnam, and Cambodia because they expect a trade war between Trump and China, and they suspect this will, make it their shoes a lot more expensive. Over in NATO, Trump has been banging the drums for a long time about the number of countries that don't spend the required 2% of GDP on defense things. And I've written several times, they really define defense spending broadly. You can increase your air radar systems, search and rescue. You can even increase pensions for your soldiers. There's a lot of stuff that counts as defense spending that is not necessarily tanks and planes. Well, anyway, shortly after the election, foreign ministers of France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom said that in many cases, quote, expenditure beyond 2% of GDP will be needed to address rising threats to security, and pledged to invest in critical military capabilities, including air defense, deep precision strikes, drones, integrated logistics, critical infrastructure and cyber defense, and research and development. So Europe is like, we got the message. We're going to have to start spending a lot more on this. And then finally, people expecting trade disputes between the U.S. and Europe. European Commission Ursula von der Leyen suggesting that one way to get in good terms with the President-elect Trump is to buy more liquefied natural gas from America. You may have noticed that for obvious reasons, Europe is trying to import less stuff from Russia. We helped them a little bit with that, with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which, or actually, I think it was Ukrainians, technically. It was Ukrainian private citizens with no help from the government who helped make sure that happened. So in order to make up, Europe's energy needs haven't changed, and so they've been a big buyer of U.S. liquefied natural gas. Sounds like they might be doing any more of that. So look, Trump gets into office, and there's like a planet or a sun, like a gravitational pull. And you can see the gravitational effects and the second order effects of that throughout the world. And look, for someone who has had a great deal of skepticism and criticism of Trump in the past, all this stuff is good stuff, and hopefully continues in the new year.
No, it's very well said. And I think we had a martini a few weeks back, how Mexico suddenly came up with its biggest fentanyl bust of all time. It's amazing how these things are so coincidental, just as the new administration's about to come in. So hopefully they feel that motivation going forward. I was torn on three big stories, two of which I mentioned on Thanksgiving. One was the fact that the Democrats lost and their radical agenda has been put on the shelf in many different ways for at least a couple of years. Probably at least 4 years in many cases. And then also we talked about a little bit in our most recent podcast with the excellence of the execution on the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. So many different terrorist leaders taken out, but that's a little bit grim for the best story of the year. So keeping it with our media theme in this particular podcast, I'm going to expand a little bit on another thing I mentioned at Thanksgiving, and that's the diminishing influence from a partisan perspective of the mainstream media. So many different ways they try to characterize everything in a lens of R versus D, blue versus red, right versus left. And so no matter what the issue is, and kind of like we were talking before, if it seems to go bad for Republicans, they highlight that. If it seems to go bad for Democrats, they kind of ignore it or give it very superficial treatment. And right after the election, or right around the time of the election, we saw record low numbers for Americans trusting the mainstream media. Depending on the poll, it was anywhere from about 10 to 15% to at the most around 30%, which means nearly 3/4 of the country doesn't believe anything the mainstream media tells them, which is not good. But the fact that the American people are making it very clear they don't believe that, they're getting their news from plenty of different alternative sources, hopefully from National Review and Radio America and this podcast and a bunch of other more reputable places, it's going to force these places that have been more focused on an agenda than on reporting the truth to have to do that to stay relevant. I don't know if that's going to happen. We've seen the viewership crater at MSNBC, to some extent at CNN. Some of that's just post-election burnout, but some of that is just, you know what, I don't want to deal with this anymore. You've got certain other media outlets, whether it's their viewership or their readership declining because people just don't trust them anymore. And so I give a lot of credit to Elon Musk and Twitter for not being the liberal censorship box that it was before 2022. He's going to be an interesting character to watch as well. But the fact that we've got this free exchange of ideas and you don't just rely on the big three networks and some other places like you could a generation ago, people can get the truth out there. And it's because of that, it forces eventually the mainstream media to deal with the truth as it comes out. And they'll pretend it's shocked and they never even saw it coming. But I guess the hope is that this leads to better, more honest, more straightforward journalism. Again, like I said at Thanksgiving, I certainly have my doubts, but the fact that Americans can go to places where they'll get a much better shake on the news is going to be better because they're not just relying on people that are trying to shape your opinion as opposed to just inform it.
You know, Greg, I said I didn't have runners up, but your description of that, one, it's an excellent selection, and two, it kind of reminded me of one that kind of falls under this category. The fact that Elon Musk figured out right after the election a way to force every progressive on Twitter to leave and to join Blue Sky. They're all just by. Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently, they're doing it voluntarily. I'm sorry. I guess you could say it's like Romney used self-deportation. But nonetheless, the liberals and progressives who are most outspoken and snidest and most obnoxious, they've kind of been safely corralled, and they're putting up the fence around them. I know they're not fans of fences, but basically this way they're safely contained and their toxic ideas will not be spreading out to a broader audience. So this effective, really border enforcement, this kind of, containment and immigration enforcement, these people in Blue Sky probably will not be allowed to re-immigrate back to Twitter. I'm doing much of this tongue in cheek, but listeners kind of get the idea. But when you are left of center, and the left threw everything it possibly had at Donald Trump in this cycle, and the country looked at it and said, yeah, we know he's got flaws, but we really don't like the way things are going. We don't like the cost of living. We don't like the situation at the border. The world is on fire. You told us that old man, a crazy shuffling feet, stumbling, mumbling old man was fine for the better part of 3 years. When we had eyes, we're going to go with this guy. You as a progressive, as a Democrat, you have two options. You can either say, wow, that did not work. Okay, we got to listen to people. We got to see where their concerns are. We got to stop blindly denying problems that are obvious and try a new approach. Or you could say, you suck, voters, and this is just a big popularity contest. I'm not going to bother to appeal to people like you. You're still deplorable. I'm going over to Blue Sky, where I'm never going to have to deal with you again. And now, I think we're all happier. People said, after a couple elections, we're going to need a national divorce. We're going to need to separate Kurt Schlichter's idea of, blue states and red states becoming two separate countries or something. No, we just need them sent to Blue Sky and they can live happily. It's not, don't think of it as a containment unit for liberals, progressives. Think of it as, trying to think of where you'd go into the pods and you just see these happy images, literal blue skies. What was it? Oh, Soylent Green. Soylent Green was a movie where people went into these pods and they just felt very happy for a little while.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then they turned into the secret ingredient to a prosperous society.
You're going to miss Stephen King and Meathead, though. I mean, I think we just need enough of them around to still be honest so we know what they really think, although I think we already do. But my favorite part about Blue Sky, where I've never been and have no intention of going, is that they're already fighting with each other over insults and whether that violates standards and practices on the site. So it's just lovely to watch all these people eat each other. which
Look,
Soylent Green metaphor seems to work.
You should be banned for anyone else's perception of a microaggression. Now, never mind on Twitter, for a long time we were getting people like saying you're going to go into the ovens. What I would characterize as macroaggressions. They were not micro. They were not a little bit of, oh, you mispronounced a word or my name or something like that. But anyway, yeah, have fun, liberals.
Quite a year for you, media. Congratulations. People are moving on from you. So tomorrow again, our person of the year, a turncoat of the year, and all sorts of good stuff. And then predictions on New Year's Day. So just one more day here in 2024, and we'll be here for it. Jim, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks so much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Monday. Join us again on Tuesday for the next Three Martini Lunch.